After being pretty mediocre for the past few seasons, the Raptors finally made some big moves last year. They moved on from OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam, two of the better players on this team, but two guys who were clearly better fit for a competing team, a team that had higher aspirations to go far in the playoffs, compete for a championship. And the Raptors just weren't at that point yet. They had just drafted Scottie Barnes in 2021, and for the amount of talent he had at his age, it made sense for the Raptors to try and build around him. The thing with OG and Siakam was that their skill sets were kind of redundant next to Scottie Barnes. So you have this young, talented player that you want to build around, and you have talented players around him. It's just the fit wasn't great, so the Raptors were in a bit of a tough situation. Rather than going into a full rebuild, though, Masai Ujiri has used terms like reset and retool when describing the Raptors situation. And when you look at the trades they made for OG and Siakam, those terms kind of make sense. You brought in Quickly and RJ Barrett, who are young players, but guys who have at least kind of made a name for themselves in the league to a degree. Obviously, they're still young and there's still room for them to grow, but the Raptors didn't acquire them strictly based off their potential. They saw the skills they showed in New York and thought that these were guys that could not only complement Scottie Barnes, but potentially get even better given their age. And while they weren't dominating their opponents, Toronto was positive when Barnes, Quickly, and Barrett shared the floor together, and given the fact that they still don't have that much experience playing together, it just makes you excited that this season, once they get a full season together under their belt, maybe those numbers can improve and maybe that trio can get even better together. So that trio is very interesting and they did produce some results, but when you play them next to Jakob Poeltl, they become even more exciting. One of Toronto's best lineups last season featured Emmanuel Quickly, Gary Trent, RJ Barrett, Scottie Barnes, and Poeltl. Now I know that Gary Trent isn't with the team anymore, but Toronto has two exciting shooting guard prospects in Grady Dick and Jacoby Walter who probably have more potential than Gary Trent. Grady Dick had a pretty up and down rookie year, but there were a lot of things to like from him. He showed a lot of potential as a shooter, whether that was in spot-up situations or moving off the ball. I really like how much effort he put into his movement off the ball, because as a shooter, you have to be able to create advantages for yourself. Sure, you're going to have guys who are going to set screens for you, whether you have the ball in your hands or you're trying to come off the ball to get open for a shot. You still have to run hard and create an advantage for yourself, as I said, and that's something that Grady Dick is good at. He's also good at timing his cuts if a defender is overplaying him, and even though he's primarily known as a shooter, he's someone who's shown some ability to put the ball on the floor, attack some closeouts, maybe handle the ball coming out of the pick and roll. He's not just a guy who's going to settle for a jump shot every time, which is important because the defense is going to try to take that away from him. Now, while I just talked about the things I like about Grady Dick, there are still things he has to improve on. The biggest thing for him is just improving his three-point consistency. He was really good shooting corner threes as a rookie, but he really struggled hitting those above the break threes. And when you have a guy like Scottie Barnes as your franchise player, somebody who's forcing a lot of turnovers, getting out in transition, you want to have other guys that can complement him in transition. And sure, there's going to be times where Grady Dick can run the floor and get to the corner for a three, but there's going to be lots of times where Scottie is pushing the ball and Grady Dick is trailing behind him. And in those situations, he's going to have to be able to reliably knock down those above the break threes. I have similar concerns about Jacoby Walter too. If you just look at his highlights, he's someone who shows that he can shoot the ball, he can create his own shot off the dribble, hit pull-up shots, but he was very inconsistent in college. This is a guy who shot 37% from the field, 34% from three, and he had some moments where he was shooting the ball really well, but then he'd have other stretches where he was just ice cold and he couldn't knock down a shot. So yeah, for both Grady Dick and Jacoby Walter, there's definitely a lot of offensive upside. You just want to see them be more consistent. And then on defense, you have to wonder what kind of impact they'll make on that end. Both of them have nice physical traits. Grady Dick is a bit of a taller shooting guard, but he doesn't have the greatest foot speed, and there were times where he was getting blown by in his rookie season. And kind of the same thing with Jacoby Walter. He's 6'5", but he does have a 6'10" wingspan. It's just, yeah, in college, there were times where maybe it was just awareness, or maybe his foot speed isn't the greatest. But yeah, there were times where he was getting blown by when maybe he shouldn't have. Now, both of these guys are still young, so there's still room for them to improve, but you want to see them be able to make an impact on defense. RJ Barrett is someone who wasn't really a good defender with the Raptors. He is still young, but he may be at an age where he kind of is what he is defensively. Then you add on the fact that Emmanuel Quickly is still a bit of a smaller guard, and you can start to see why it would be a problem if Grady Dick or Jacoby Walter aren't too impactful on defense. Then as far as the outside shooting goes, you want to see consistency there too. This Raptors team is a team that's kind of struggled with three-point consistency. RJ Barrett is someone who's been very up and down throughout his career. He shot really well with the Raptors, but there are some times where guys get traded to new teams and they play really well initially. They are really efficient, they're able to score a lot, but then they kind of crash back down to reality in that second year. Not saying that's going to happen with RJ Barrett, but just looking at his career and the up and down nature that he's had in his career, it is possible that he takes a little bit of a downtick next year in terms of his offensive production. Then when we look at Scottie Barnes, this is a guy who's improved as a shooter throughout his career, but he's still not someone who's super reliable. He's shown potential as a mid-range shooter, but there's also been times where he just hasn't been able to knock down that shot consistently. And then last year, he shot a career high percentage from three. But if we look at how he shot over the entirety of the season, he was really inconsistent. At the beginning of the year, he was close to 40% from three. And a lot of people were saying that, oh, he's a legitimate three-point shooter now. He's a legitimate threat from out there. But then in that second half of the year, he really struggled from three. And his three-point percentage went from near 40% to finishing at 34% for the whole season. So yeah, if Grady Dick and Jacoby Walter can be consistent shooters, and then they can at least be solid on defense, they could really help out this Raptors team. Like I said last year, one of their best lineups featured Quickly, Gary Trent, RJ Barrett, Barnes, and Pirtle. So if you have those same four guys and you plug in either Grady Dick or Jacoby Walter giving you pretty good production, that could be an exciting lineup that's also young and has room to get even better. The Raptors also have good veterans like Kelly Olynyk, Chris Boucher, and Bruce Brown who could give them good minutes. And if you have a good starting lineup like I was just touching on, and you have those three guys coming off your bench, that's a pretty good rotation. The thing is, we don't know what the future holds for these guys on this team. They are veteran players, so there's a chance they're traded at the deadline. And if they're moved, the rest of the bench for this Raptors team isn't too good. They have a lot of young guys who are either just getting started in the league or haven't really found their footing in the league just yet. A guy like Davion Mitchell was a lottery pick by Sacramento, but he wasn't really able to find success there. He's a bit of a smaller guard, and there are still questions about what his best role is. Is he someone that can actually run an offense reliably, or is he better as an off-ball 3-and-D player? Then there's Ochai Agbaji, who's trying to become a more consistent 3-and-D player. You have rookies like Urish Shamshe, Jamal Shed, Jonathan Mobo. There's a lot of young, raw talent on this roster, and while that could be really good in the future, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to produce the best results right now. So while I do think that this Raptors team could be pretty respectable this year, the focus has to be on development. You want to see flashes from those raw players that you drafted this year, and then you just want to see guys like Scottie Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly, RJ Barrett just grow and gel together. The thing with the Raptors is that although they're still young, they have committed a lot of money to their young players. So you just want to see these guys elevate their game. You want to see Scottie Barnes go from a star to a superstar level player. And the big way he's going to do that is just becoming a more consistent shooter. We already know how great he is as an all-around player. He's a very versatile defender. He can handle the ball very well for his size, push the ball, set up his teammates, get to the basket. Just adding a consistent jump shot will help solidify him as a player the Raptors can build around. Then you have RJ Barrett, who is an efficient scorer for Toronto, but needs to improve on defense. And then Emmanuel Quickly, he was good in a larger role with the Raptors, but in the past he's shown that he really struggled in the playoffs. And I think that's a legitimate concern to have about him, especially since you gave him so much money. But I will say that when he was struggling in the playoffs in the past, he was younger, he had a lesser role. So when you have a smaller role, it kind of plays with you mentally because you know that at the end of the day, if you mess up, you're on a bit of a shorter leash, you can just easily be replaced. But now that he has a really big contract with the Raptors, the team is showing that they believe in him. He's the starting point guard of the future. That may help him in the playoffs going forward, knowing that he has a solidified spot. I do understand the concerns about Toronto, these concerns that they're just going to become one of these middle of the pack teams, a team that's not bad enough to get a really, really high draft pick, but also a team that's not really good enough to make the playoffs, or if they do, not good enough to actually advance and make noise in the playoffs. Those same doubters may not be too high on Quickly, RJ Barrett, or any of the other young guys, but I don't think that for every single team we can just say that, oh, they should have this young star player that they want to build around, in this case Scottie Barnes, and we should just tank and hope to get the #1 pick and then get a co-star for him that way. Because if every single young team tried to do that, there would be a lot of teams that would be disappointed because they wouldn't get a top pick. I think it's reasonable to have some skepticism about the overall core of this team, but not every franchise in the NBA can say that they have a potential superstar on their team, and the Raptors have that kind of guy in Scottie Barnes. Every franchise wants to have a player that they confidently feel like they can build around, and then on the other hand, that player wants to feel like the franchise is doing a good job of building around them. And so far, I feel like the Raptors are making the effort to show Scottie Barnes that they want to build around him. They've acquired guys like Quickly and Barrett who are still young, but guys who can still help the Raptors be competitive and still win games in the present. They're showing Scottie that they're not just viewing his early years as lost seasons where they're just hoping to get lucky and acquire a young star in the draft. On top of that, they drafted a guy like Jonathan Mobo, who was one of Scottie Barnes' childhood friends. So they're trying to create an environment where Scottie can feel comfortable, but also still feel like he can be competitive with this team and win games with this team. At the end of the day, there's not one single way to rebuild a team. Like I said, you can't always just hope to be saved by getting the #1 pick or even a top 3 pick. Sometimes you just have to take a chance on some guys that have already played in the league and hope that they can develop on your team. With that being said, I have the Raptors finishing 11th in the East this year. I think that they'll be a competitive, respectable team, and there's a chance they actually do make the play-in. But for me, I have them just missing out, and a big reason is just the depth of this team. As I mentioned, they have a lot of young guys who aren't really established in the league, they're still developing. It could be a situation where they have a solid record leading up to the trade deadline, but then they make some trades, bring in some picks, some young assets, and they kind of struggled in those last 2 months of the year. I do expect to see growth though. I'd like to see a starting lineup with Quickly, Grady Dick, Barrett, Scottie Barnes, and Pirtle. I think that that could be a good lineup that's young and could potentially grow even more together. Then I'd just like to see how Jacoby Walter does in his rookie year. Maybe a guy like Davion Mitchell or one of the rookies they drafted can show some potential. You just want to see what these young guys show you and see how they fit next to your franchise player in Scottie Barnes. This upcoming class is also a deep one, so you don't necessarily need the #1 pick to feel happy about where you are. You could get the 8th or 9th pick and still feel confident in the guy you're taking. We also saw last year that a team like Atlanta nearly made the playoffs and then still wound up with the #1 pick. So if you're Toronto, you could have a year where you are still competitive, still respectable, still winning some games. Maybe you're not quite good enough to make the playoffs, but you still like the direction your team is going in, and then you're rewarded with a good pick in the draft. There's going to be lots of opportunities when you have plenty of young talent, and I'm just excited to see how the Raptors play this year. Anyways, that's going to be all for today's video. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. With all of that being said, I'm out, and I'll see you in the next video.